All right, so we're recording, and what we've got here, and let me go, I'll try to turn off a couple of these lights because it's so just remember that we were talking about body count, we were talking about the individual ways we measure body count. And they're kind of the accuracy and the underlying ideas behind all of them, okay? So, when we left off on Monday, we were talking about DEXA, okay? And we had talked about how DEXA is a 3-compartment model, right? That it measures fat-free mass, so muscle and organs and things, water, adipose tissue or fat mass, but then it also gives us bone, okay? It also gives us bone. That makes it 3. It's more accurate because it takes the fat-free mass and it separates bone from muscle and water and those kinds of things, because they have very distinct densities. I told you guys that MRI is, we can argue that MRI is a 3-component model as well, but it is the most accurate. Very, very accurate in comparison to doing an anatomical dissection, probably within 1%. And we told you guys about how you have to take all of these different slices through the body to get all of this. And then it looks like this. And some poor grad student like me has to come in and circle out everything. Okay? So very expensive, very time consuming to analyze, but it is very, very accurate. Okay? Not that it matters for you guys, and this won't be on the test, but we also have over in our regular building in Dr. Deb's lab, we don't have an MRI machine, but we have a CT machine. And we can take like one single picture, we can get one slice that looks like this with the CT machine. So we can take like one slice through your knee, or one slice through mid-thigh, or one slice at your wrist, and we can do some quantification in those areas based upon all of that. And it takes like 10 minutes. It's not a kind of a crazy amount of time. We have that to really look at differences in bone. It gives us these really high-res pictures of people's bones and things. But we could do it with all of that as well. Okay. So here's some MRI pictures. Basically, we're going to start at here at the bottom, taken at L4, L5, sort of in the slices in between L4, L5. And this is pre and post. I believe it is 6 months of 500 calories a day of caloric restriction. And so these people lost like 20 kilograms or something. They lost like 40 pounds over the course of 6 months being in this big caloric deficit. And so one of the utilities of this is like, right, you can see just how they've gotten like smaller, but also their kind of areas of subcutaneous fat and things have also shrunk to some extent. And so this is how we've tended to use MRI, is to pick a particular location and try to quantify what's happening to fat at that location. MRI is particularly useful for helping us to quantify visceral adiposity. So adipose tissue from kind of right below your belly button to about your diaphragm. So like right here, okay? Which tends to be more common in men and tends to be highly, highly predictive of the development of type 2 diabetes. So we can use MRI for that. It's not that expensive, and it's not, doesn't take us that long to get images just in kind of that maybe 6-inch area. Okay. So we talked about skin folds and some of the underlying assumptions of that. Let me get out one of the pairs of skin fold calipers. You guys can play around with these if you like. But we did this, I had you guys grab your tricep the other day and look at things, but we do a thing just like this. We grab the skin, pinch it out, and then we put the calipers on there, and it gives us a measurement in millimeters. Then you measure tricep, chest, okay, place here over your ribs called mid-axillary. We measure right over your iliac crest. We measure right adjacent to your belly button. We measure back on your scapula. We measure on your thigh. So we measure at these different sites that are kind of distributed upper and lower body and midsection areas. And based upon the sum of those skin folds, we can estimate your overall percent body fat. So when you guys do your lab, I have a database of skin fold measures from previous classes, because we did the lab the same way for years and years and years. And so I have data from all of them. What you guys are going to do, rather than being able to measure them, I'm going to give you all skin fold measures from someone from a previous class. It's completely, there's no names on it or anything, but from someone that is basically the closest match I can make to your height and your weight and your BMI and your percent body fat from the bioelectrical impedance. And then so we'll give you some numbers, and you can use those numbers to practice the equations that we use to calculate stuff from the skin folds. Okay? And so we will talk a little bit more about that when I assign that particular lab. We'll go through how those calculations work. But that's the general science behind this, is that subcutaneous fat is a reasonable approximation of other stuff. Okay? So we pinch like this, about 30 to 60% of all body fat is sub-Q. So we can use these 3 or 7 sites depending upon what we're going to do. Ideally, we do 7. Okay? We have more measurements that provides us more accuracy in that way. You guys do have to know all of these. There will be questions about these on the next test. Okay? You need to know the anatomical location of the 7 sites for skin folds. And if we do a 3-site assessment, which saves us a little bit of time, it introduces some additional area, but you will note that in men and in women, we're going to test at different places. Okay? We're going to test at different places. So I do want you to know all of that, because there will be a calculation where I give you guys some skin folds, and you guys are going to have to calculate some things on the next test, just like you're going to do in lab. We will talk about that when I give out and I assign that lab probably next week. Okay? All right. So we mentioned bioelectrical impedance. The machine that we're going to use in the lab is going to look like this. It's going to be a handheld deal, and it runs an electrical current into your body. And then if you have more fat, the current travels more slowly, and it estimates your percent body fat. If you have more muscle, you have more water, right? Because you have more muscle, then it's going to move faster, and therefore it's going to give you a lower percent fat. This is one of those things that you can buy this little thing, which we have a couple of, we will use in class for doing the lab. You can buy these things for like 20 bucks, okay? They look sophisticated. It looks like, ooh, it's a computer, and it's going to do this, and it's going to do that. It looks sophisticated. It's actually not that sophisticated, nor is it particularly accurate, okay? And so of all of the ways that we try to measure body composition, this is probably the least accurate thing that we can do, okay? The least accurate. Any of you that have been over and you've done this at your gym or over at the Huff, that's great. You're going to get a number, okay? All I'm going to tell you guys is that number's probably wrong. It's probably not a real number, but that number is still useful, right? Because if it says, I have 20% body fat and I want to get down to 18%, at least it's a way for me to track what it thinks that is, okay? It tells you you have 20% body fat. You may actually have 25, or you may actually have 15. It's going to be kind of off in some way, but at least it gives us some kind of a way to estimate and measure something.
You said that was the least accurate?
This is the least accurate way of all of the ways that we measure body composition. Bioelectrical impedance, or BIA, is the least accurate. Okay? It's the least accurate.
So that way it's like $20.
Pardon?
That way it's $20.
Sure. I mean, the people that are selling it for 20 bucks aren't going to advertise that it's the least accurate in comparison, but like, that thing is like 20 bucks. This is $300. I'm in the wrong business. We need to sell these things, right? Now, for what we do in lab, we actually have some big plastic ones that are like $8 a piece. But these are better. They're a little more comfortable and those kinds of things. These are like $300 a piece. So, but again, this is easy. Anybody can use this. My 2-year-old can use that. Okay? Put something in, punch a button, tell her to hold it out like this, and it will work. Okay? This requires training. If you don't know what you're doing the skin folds will be worse than doing that. But in a person that has been trained and has practiced doing skin folds, they're going to be way more accurate than the biological impedance. Okay? Okay. So that's how we quantify body composition. Okay? That's how we do it. The next piece that we're going to kind of lay on top of this is going to begin to again set the stage for chronic diseases and the poor health outcomes that are associated with inactivity and lack of fitness in those things. Okay? And so that is going to get us at this particular idea of being overweight or obese versus having some sort of normal body weight. Okay? Being overweight, being obese leads to negative or poor health outcomes. Okay? I'll share some scary stats about that in just a minute. Okay? So remember that lots of the data that we have on the health outcomes are related to BMI. Okay? Here we have our flexi gym bro, right, who is normal weight in theory. Here we have someone that is what they're calling overweight, a BMI of 25, and then a BMI of over 30, where a person is obese. If we were to actually look at things, we're probably obese in this picture and then morbidly obese in this picture. That's kind of not the point. The point is that having excess body weight, okay, general, having excess body weight above some normal standard amount for your height, okay, can involve most of the time having excess body fat. Okay? The vast majority of people, not everyone, but the vast majority of people in the general population that have an elevated BMI, okay, their extra weight is going to occur in the form of adipose tissue, okay, rather than in extra muscle mass or extra bone mineral density. Okay? Especially when we get out of a college-age population, especially when we get into people, say, over 30 years of age, okay? Really even over 25 years of age. Okay? So about 70% of people in the U.S., about 70%, are overweight by BMI. Okay? A BMI of 25 or greater. Okay? 70%. If we calculated that based upon you guys in this room, y'all are going to be nowhere near 70%. Okay? So you can imagine then, much like our activity levels, that if we throw out people that are like under 25, our numbers go up dramatically. So you guys are saving the adult population for the most part. Okay? In general, these sort of people on the younger end of adulthood are very much going to be that 30% for the most part that aren't there. And so if you look at people like over 30, this number goes up considerably, maybe like 85% or something. And I want you to note that it has steadily increased over time. Okay? It's steadily increased. About 33%. It's now up to almost 40% of adults in the U.S. are over a BMI of 30, are considered obese. Okay? They're considered obese. This combination of obesity and inactivity that we will get into later is the one thing that drives cardiovascular disease and drives type 2 diabetes and certain kinds of cancer and anxiety and depression and some things like that. So it's really, really a big deal. Okay? Zach, you had a question?
Yeah, would that number be smaller if we use more active
So when you say we use a more accurate measure, you mean like if we measured body composition rather than BMI? So like if we use percent body fat or something like that?
Right, but because I know BMI doesn't account for, like you said, people who
It-
Mhm.
So that's a really, really good question. And the answer is I don't know, because we don't have data on all of that, right? So we have some data from like DEXA. We're beginning to accumulate more data from DEXA on actual kind of body composition measures and those particular health outcomes. But there are not these standard cutoff points for normal weight, overweight, obese, based upon like percent body fat in adults that we have with BMI. And so it's difficult to know. I can tell you that as your body composition shifts, as your percent body fat by any measure is going to increase, then your chances of having type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease will tend to increase. That's true, but we don't have these kind of hard and fast cutoff points because it's just much more difficult. We need data from millions and millions of people over years and years and years to really be able to kind of build this model to say that here's the number, or if you're over this, it's going to be that. Okay? So I think your idea is very much correct. It would be better if we had that, but we don't yet.
So do you see like medicines for really not use BMI being position and stuff for
Probably not, because BMI is easy to get, right? If somebody walks into your PT clinic, you can measure their height and their weight, and you can tell them, right, well, your BMI category is here. You guys should probably think about going for a walk today. It would be helpful, it would be beneficial. Although the answer is everybody should go for a walk today, right? Like regardless of what it is, we should just be more active. But it's easy for us to get that information and to tell people you may be at an increased risk because of this and because of this, rather than, right? Because what happens is, okay, well, I've got the $20 BIA machine and I make the measurement, and let's say that our cutoff point in women is 40% body fat, puts you into the overweight category, or whatever we think the increased risk category is. But if that machine has an error of 6 or 7 or 8% one way or the other, like it's hard for us to know, right? It tells us you're at 40, but you might actually be at 32, or you might actually be at 48. And so it becomes, without having like a DEXA or something that's very, very accurate, then our ability to tell someone you are or aren't at an increased risk with this becomes more difficult. Does that make sense? Okay, so the other very, very concerning factor on this is in the olden days, and by the olden days, I don't mean like when I was little, which was, I was born in 1978, so I was sort of a kid in the 80s and those kinds of things. Yes, I lived through Stranger Things, that's right. So it is very nostalgia-inducing for me, if you've seen those. But if we look back like in the 60s and whatnot and into the 70s, and even into kind of like the very, very early 80s, obesity was very, very rare in kids, okay? Very rare in kids. It continues to be rare in comparison to adults now, but it's much, much higher than what it used to be, right? So if we're at somewhere between maybe 5 or 6% of the population, and this is including sort of high school age folks, right? We're now basically like 4 times that. Right? If you're at 4 or 5%, we're at 3 or 4 times what that number is, and these numbers have continued to go up. Okay, so this trend that we have, okay, in industrialized sort of Western society, that we're not very active and we eat too much, and it's killing us. It's making us obese. It's making us gain weight, and all of that. Okay, what do you guys think's happened here? What's different about what kids do today versus what kids did in the 60s, let's just say? Electronics. What am I doing with my electronics?
Sitting.
I sit, right? So our godchildren, although they're not supposed to very often, they play a lot of Mario Kart, right? They're not allowed to play Fortnite. They really want to play Fortnite. The oldest, he's 12. His mom won't let him play Fortnite, and so, but all his friends do. So I'm sure when he goes to his friend's house, he plays Fortnite. But they sit, right? You sit in front of a TV. You sit in front of an iPad. We have technology. You go to school. How many of you had, when you were in elementary school, how many of you had recess? Okay. How many of you had PE class every day? Okay. How many of you got recess more than once during the day? Just once. Okay. You need to go to school where Zach and Holly went to school. Maybe Camilla. Okay. We have taken with what kids do, some ways for better, some ways for worse. We've removed a lot of the leisure time physical activity from what kids do, right? I can remember, just like in Stranger Things, I can remember riding my bike just outside all day, riding my bike around all the time, right? Going down the street to see the neighbor kids, my other friends were over here, over there. We would just ride our bikes around, right? With our backpacks and our, toy guns and things and whatever we had. That's what we did. You know how many kids I see riding their bikes in my neighborhood in Oklahoma City? None. Now, admittedly, we do live in the sort of right in the, not, in that sort of urban core downtown. There's a lot of traffic and things like that. But I don't see kids outside playing. I don't see kids doing, riding their bikes and stuff. For whatever reason, they're just not doing it as much. Okay? The other thing that's changed is food. They're less active and food has changed. Although there's some strange evidence now that we don't eat anymore and we're not in some ways less active than we were like in the 80s at times when all of this began, and yet somehow obesity rates keep going up. There's some really fascinating data that's coming out about all of that, and I have no clue what that means. Okay? But some kids eat worse. We'll just say that. There's more fast food. There's a whole bunch of stuff. As a parent of a 2-year-old that is basically a vegetarian and only wants to eat like vegetables and fruit, and now she likes chips because dad likes chips and things. It's hard, right? It is hard when kids don't want to eat. It's hard to figure these kinds of things out. And so we kind of have to try to deal with some of that stuff. But those are some things that have changed that have probably led to some of this. And they are really the same reasons that adults are getting to be that way. We eat more and we move less. Okay? Billy. So, a fascinating question. So Lily's question is, could some of this just be genetic, right? You have parents that are overweight, and then, so maybe their kids are going to be overweight. What I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides, I think, are some scary statistics, okay? So what if I told you, Lily, that, so you guys all weigh whatever you weigh right now, correct? Can we agree on that that's a thing, right? I can put you on the scale. You want to be terrified? Okay. On average, over from y'all's age to my age, and I am a statistic now because of this, on average, you all will gain 20 to 25 pounds between now and the time that you are in your early 40s. Okay? So my question is, have your genes changed over that time? If you had a kid now, would the genes you pass on to your kid, if you had that child at 20 or 21, really be any different than the genes if you had your child when you were 40, like my wife and I? You know, my wife and I weigh more now than we did then, right? Her mostly because she was pregnant. And she just, is still a little bit, has a little bit more, but we're bigger, right? That's just the way that it is. Have our genes changed? No. Abigail's right. No, our genes haven't changed. The genes we pass on haven't changed. right? And so the question is, have our genes changed very much since in the last 100 years? No, right? The human genome is basically the same, right? There's not a lot of evolutionary pressure on our genome and those kinds of things. We have gotten taller, which may be related to better nutrition, or it may also just be that some people are taller, and it seems like the tall people are having more kids with each other, and so we're getting a little bit taller. That has changed. If you want to know about those things, go to any kind of like history museum and see like old-timey like airplanes or submarines or like cars and things from like, you know, the 30s, and you're like, how am I going to fit myself into this little bitty thing? Okay, and so people were just a little smaller. And part of that, maybe they just weren't reaching their genetic potential. But it's a fascinating question, but I'm not 100% sure that we have a lot of evidence that suggests that's really what's going on. Okay, are there people that are genetically predisposed to having a higher percent body fat or a higher percent muscle mass? Absolutely there are. Are people genetically predisposed to responding better to exercise or a diet and have a better ability to change those things? Absolutely. But for the most part, that really probably hasn't, our genome hasn't changed very much. Okay? Prevalence of self-reported obesity among the US by states. This is 2018 data. Here we are. States in the darkest red are over 35% of their adult population. Oklahoma, we're not in the worst collection, but we're not very, very far out from all of that. I don't really know what's happening in DC and Colorado. I kind of know what's going on in Hawaii probably with these kinds of things. But there, again, is this kind of very, very kind of clustering of stuff. But I can tell you that all of these states, everybody has gone up since the 80s. Okay? Since the advent of computers and the internet and all of those things, everybody has gone up. Okay? So but I want to break this down now by, this is everybody. So, because there's some interesting kind of demographic and ethnicity related things that we need to be at least aware of with obesity, okay? Here's what we're going to classify as non-Hispanic whites, okay? So these are in essence people of mostly European descent, okay? And so if you look at this, right, we, in that particular group, which is the kind of largest kind of ethnic group in the US, not quite as many places are over 35% or even over 30 to 35%. We're a little bit less here, okay? California scoots in as they're doing pretty good with that, okay? If we look at, though, here it is among non-Hispanic Black or African American adults, okay? We don't have data from Idaho and South Dakota. It's mostly because there's very, very few Black people there. But you look at this, okay? Lots of dark red. Do I have the Hispanic ones as well? Here we have the ones that are of Hispanic descent. Same kind of a thing. This is mostly due to kind of distribution. What we see is that Hispanic and African American ethnicities tend to have higher prevalences of overweight and obesity. And so because of all of that, they tend to be more susceptible or have a higher prevalence of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, okay? And some of that is linked, unfortunately, to socioeconomic status. Some of it is linked to education levels, which is partially why we have to try to sort of bridge some of those gaps. Okay, maybe in lifestyle intervention, you guys will talk about social determinants of health. You'll talk about some of the other lifestyle-related factors that are going to go into some of these things. But they tend to be these ethnic minority populations. If we look at sort of non-Hispanic, but kind of folks of Asian descent, sort of Asian descent that are considered white in the U.S., they tend to be the lowest. Okay? They tend to be the lowest. And that may be more genetic, right? That may be more of a genetic thing. But there does seem to be something in these ethnic minorities, and we need to pay attention to that because it creates something called a health disparity. It creates a situation where certain groups of people are more prone to getting things, and then they also tend to have less access to food or better food and less access to healthcare, and that creates an undue burden on them compared to others. We need to work to try to normalize that out because that's good for all of us. Okay? So what is it that causes obesity? We've talked about this a little bit indirectly, and the real answer is we don't know. Okay? There's probably some Venn diagram of your behaviors, your actual environment that you're going to live in, as well as your genetics, and there's probably some kind of overlapping place here where all of that is working together to lead to this idea of obesity. Okay? We do know there's some people that tend to have experienced psychological or emotional trauma, post-traumatic stress, those kinds of things. They oftentimes tend to have higher rates of obesity. There are people that have like real, what we think of as sort of physiological explanations, hormonal imbalances, things that regulate metabolism. Okay? If you have sort of underexpression of thyroid hormone, you are going to probably be obese until we can fix that underexpression of thyroid hormone. If you have an overexpression of thyroid hormone, you're going to be very, very jittery and relatively thin because those things are controlling your metabolic rate. So there are some things like all of that that are certainly going on. There are things about diet and physical inactivity that are going to be important. There's also this idea, though, of cultural and familial factors. Okay? Cultural and familial factors that we have to understand and appreciate when we want to propose these health interventions. Before I was here, I was at the University of Mississippi. And so Mississippi has the highest percentage of its population, the highest percentage of the African-American population of any state in the country. Okay? It also has the highest rates of poverty. It has like basically the highest rates of people that have not finished high school. It has really, really poor health outcomes in both these kind of lower socioeconomic status, ethnic minorities, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and the sort of rural non-Hispanic white folks that are going to be there. And so our health promotion department, they got a big grant, and they went into a predominantly African American community to try to do a needs assessment and figure out for them what's going on, how can we make things better, right? How can we make things better? And so one of the things that they learned from all of this was, especially in African American women, there was the idea that obesity was attractive, right? And that was a valuable thing. And so women wanted to gain as much weight as possible to be valued and to be considered attractive. And they had no idea, because of a lack of education, that while that might be considered attractive and that was good for self-esteem and good for psychological outcomes, and those things were good, but that there were some poor health consequences associated with that. And so, but that particular community, they valued something from an appearance standpoint that might have led to a worse health outcome. In the same way, right, that if we think of sort of overly skinny, sort of Victoria's Secret models and things like that, or we think of eating disorders a lot in women, but they're just as prevalent in men in many, many ways, in those kinds of things. But we think about sort of in the other direction, that can be bad. Like there's bad health outcomes from being underweight and being malnourished or having anorexia or having bulimia and those kinds of things. But there may be some cultural value placed upon that as well. We just have to understand those things, because if you want to go and try to help, if you want to see these people as patients when you're a PT or an OT and you try to tell them, you know, we're rehabbing your knee, but you're obese, and that's putting extra pressure on your knee and that's making your health outcomes worse. You may also have to work with them though on, well, but I like being this size because it makes me feel attractive. Others think that I'm attractive, which is a perfectly great thing. It's a very valuable thing. That side of sort of psychological health, we have to learn how to navigate this, okay? And so those are the kinds of things and why it's very difficult for us to understand and get a handle on all of these things as we go forward, okay? there are some very, very serious health consequences of being overweight and obese. Pretty much every chronic disease we've talked about in class in the very, very beginning, like everything goes up, okay? Certain cancer risk, especially in women, risk of breast cancer and ovarian cancer and things tend to go up with obesity levels. Heart disease goes up really significantly. High blood pressure is a form of heart disease, but if you are obese, you're probably going to be hypertensive. Type 2 diabetes really goes up with obesity and those kinds of things. Okay, so there's a lot of potential problems. Now remember though, if we are obese but we just remove this piece, if we remove the physical inactivity, we make a lot of these things a lot better. Okay, you can be obese as long as you are active. You're going to have a risk profile much more similar to a normal weight person. Okay, that's not so that there is not going to be some additive effect of being obese but active, right, over being normal weight and active or overweight or active or something. But if we can remove this little piece, it really knocks down a lot of these other things. Okay? All right. Yep. So this is kind of just showing those things. This is a graph when everybody talks about like why we pick the cutoff points that we do. Why is 25 an area of increasing risk? Why is 30 more? It's because we do, and each dot here is going to represent like 1 million people basically. And what they're building though is this model that here's our mortality rate or our mortality ratio. Here's our folks that are somewhat underweight but kind of normal here. And then the curve begins to bend upward right around 25 or thereabouts. And so you're in this 25 to 30, this overweight range. It's up a little bit, but it really begins to bend even farther upward once we get out here past 30. And as it goes up from there, that slope is going to keep increasing. Okay? And so that's kind of where we are. Here was obesity and fitness and all-cause mortality. This is what I've already shown you guys these data, but it is people that are fit in the red bars, people that are unfit. So this is some VO2 max level, probably because you're active. So just imagine red is people that are active. Obese and active, you're better off than a person that is lean, okay, or normal weight, but is inactive or unfit, has a lower VO2 max. And so in this way, we have lots of data that says if you can just stay active and try to keep your VO2 max up, you're going to be in a much better place. Okay. So I want to finish all of this off with just a very brief, very basic talk on, what time it is? We're doing on time. You know what? Let's take a break here, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about body weight regulation. We'll talk about kind of caloric intake. Okay, so guys, let's come back at 12:12. All right, 12:12. All right. So on a particular day, you're either going to be like right at matching your needs, you're going to be a little up or a little down or a lot up or a lot down. Okay? To understand the role that all of that plays in what it is that your body composition is and what your weight overall is, we have to consider that over some longer term period of time, okay? You eat nothing all day today, and you're not going to magically like lose 10 pounds today, okay? We go to CC's, is that still a thing? We go to CC's and have like all you can eat pizza, right? And just eat like 10,000 calories full on Michael Phelps, okay, of food today over what we need. We're not going to magically like gain. So your weight and your body composition are indicators of the long-term kind of balance between intake and expenditure, okay? Much like how we gain or lose muscle mass, you know, you're either doing something where today maybe I'm gaining a little bit of weight or I'm giving a stimulus that would cause weight gain, or I'm under and so it would cause weight loss, okay? Now, there are some people that will argue that this is not true, okay? Some of them are much smarter than me. but I don't think that they're 100% correct. I think that it's absolute most basic, okay, these thermodynamic equations will work. I can promise all of you that if you, over the course of 6 months, consistently every day eat in excess of what you need for that day, you are very, very likely going to gain weight. Similarly, if over the course of, say, 6 months, you consume less than what you need on that particular day, you are very likely going to lose weight. And there will be some shifting of body composition and what the composition of that weight loss and weight gain is going to be. But in general, this idea works, okay? This idea holds true. So, on a given day, most people's energy expenditure is somewhere between maybe 60 to 75% resting metabolic rate. You guys as college students, it's probably going to be a little more than that because you guys tend to be more active than regular people. But in general, it's going to be here. About 10% comes from energy required for digestion, and then the rest of all of that is going to come from some sort of physical activity, okay? Maybe it's exercise, maybe it's non-exercise. I'm just walking to travel around or whatever else. It may be from one of those kinds of things. People that are very, very active, this metabolic rate portion falls, this activity portion goes way up. People that eat a whole lot, the thermic effect of feeding is going to go up. People that are very, very sedentary, metabolic rate is going to have a larger component than this, right? The math of all of that makes sense to you guys in general? Kind of makes sense? Okay. So we can look at sort of the breakdown of stuff if we want to, right? Energy intake, you can calculate the number of calories in pretty much anything that you're going to want. Like if you have carbohydrates and proteins, it's about 4 kilocalories or 4 calories per gram of whatever you're consuming, right? Some of you guys who were sending me screenshots of your little apps, and it can like find a food, and you can type in that food, right? Like how many carbs it has, and how many grams of fat it has, and how many grams of cholesterol it has, and it can spit all of this stuff out, and it can give us these really accurate estimates of energy intake, okay? Dr. Pinku liked to do this one. He's Israeli, maybe they like Heineken, I don't really understand, but the idea is that basically you could calculate the number of calories in this one 12-ounce beer, and then you could figure out, okay, right, it is this much, it's like 200 calories, and so I have now consumed 200 calories, and so what is that doing against my metabolic rate? How many like miles would I have to walk or run to sort of work off there or spend the calories that were consumed? You can do this for any particular kind of food. Dr. Pinku liked to do it for beer. So there we go, okay? And so we can figure out like walking and running is about 1 kcal per kilogram of body weight per kilometer. So the idea is that walking and running, you burn about 100 calories per mile, okay? About 100 calories. Whether you walk or you run, it's about 100 calories, give or take, okay? Cycling burns fewer calories than walking and running because it's non-weight bearing. Swimming burns more than all of it combined because it is both upper and lower body. Any of you guys that don't swim a lot, try to go swim a bunch, it sucks. You get tired really quickly trying to swim. It's a great workout, but it burns a lot of different calories in that, which is why Michael Phelps needs to eat 15,000 calories a day when he was training for the Olympics. Okay, so all of this, blah, blah, we've got those things. So I don't have this other thing on here, okay? But here's what I want you guys to think about, okay? As we look at this, as we look at all of this, okay? The place where we go wrong on things is that most of us overestimate what our resting metabolic rate is, okay? If you are, let's just say, a sort of stereotypical college-aged woman, okay, who is, I don't know, 5'4" and weighs 130 pounds or something like that. We're just kind of like right in the middle of everything, and has roughly 30 or 32% body fat, okay? That woman probably needs about, okay, I don't know, 1,200 to 1,400 calories of metabolic rate in a day. Okay? In some of you that are smaller than that or have less muscle than that, your resting metabolic rate may be as low as like 800 calories a day. Okay? For some of y'all that are very petite. Guys, we are probably somewhere between your typical like 5'10", 180-pound college-age guy, give or take somewhere between maybe 1,200 and about 1,700. Okay? There are some guys that are considerably smaller than that, so that number is going to go down. Resting metabolic rate is very much dependent upon muscle mass. Okay? Very much dependent upon muscle mass. So imagine this. Look at what you guys ate yesterday. Okay? Imagine you did no physical activity whatsoever. Okay? I don't need to show hands. It's not a big deal. But just think about this. Ladies, how many of you were around 1,200 calories? Guys, how many of y'all were around 13, 14, 1,500 calories? Right? That's what your resting metabolic rate equates to. Okay? You guys tend to be pretty active. So for every mile of activity you covered in a day, give yourself 100 more calories. Now look at your numbers. Okay? If you were eating more than what your metabolic rate plus, let's just say, whatever your activity was, you were in a situation where if you continue doing that over many, many days, okay, even if it's just a little bit, you would gain weight. If you are under even a little bit, and you continue that for many, many, many days, you're likely going to lose weight. Okay? I think I've shared this number with you guys before, but I'm not 100% certain. Okay? If you exceed your daily needs every day for a year by 50 calories, okay, your metabolic rate plus your activity, you exceed that number by 50 calories a day over the course of a year, you will gain 5 pounds. If you're under by 50 calories a day, you will lose 5 pounds-ish. Okay? Do you all know what 50 calories is? It's a fun-sized Snickers, right? That's it. That's like 3 Doritos or something, which is much very important to me. Okay? And so the thing, if you can appreciate, right, why we have a problem, why obesity has become an issue in our country, is that imagine all you have to do, you don't have to be off by 50 calories a day over the course of 20 years if you're going to gain 20 or 25 pounds over the course of 20 years, which is what the average American does between like 20 and 40 or 25 and 45, right? All you got to do is gain 1 pound. You have to be off 10 calories a day every day for 20 years, and you gain 20 pounds. Okay? There's not a lot of fudge zone in this. And that's why when we have things like Chick-fil-A and Sonic and Brahms and CC's Pizza and Dunkin' Donuts, right, and all of those things that are very calorically dense kinds of food that taste really good, you give us a big dopamine spike in our brain, or like, ooh, this is good, eat more, right? It becomes difficult. And so I don't do this to try to illustrate in some ways whether or not we should or we shouldn't be trying to diet one way or the other to increase weight or to decrease weight. I just want you guys to appreciate the small margins that can add up over time. And you look around and you're me and you're like, I don't understand what happened, right? And I'm in a place now where like I'm at the age where high blood pressure becomes a risk, you become more at risk for these kinds of things, and I'm less able to be active, and so it begins to kind of catch up, and I'm like, I gotta really start making some lifestyle changes. I can't eat Doritos all the time. It's upsetting to me, okay? And so that's where we are. You guys get online, it's like, oh, what's your metabolic rate, right? Typical college-age guy, you need 2,500 calories in a day. No, you don't. For the most part, you don't, okay? You really, really don't. Maybe if you play defensive end for the football team, you do, right? But a lot of people don't, okay? And I think that's the part where we're off a little bit on. Okay? So that's all that I've got for today. Obesity will come up in pretty much everything that we cover from now on in class, okay? We will talk about the sort of negative effects of obesity and all of our other things. All right. If you did something, email it to me, or if you wrote it out, drop it off. I will give you class credit. If you want to talk about your test, come and see me. The other part of this, guys, you all saw when I